Hey, how's it going? My name is King Jowser Jobs, and recently I made it to Crimson in ranked Resurgence with a 2.5 KD ratio. And with Season 3 of Warzone and Rebirth Island ranked just around the corner, I wanted to share 9 of the most valuable tips I've learned on my way to one of the highest ranks in the game. And regardless of what rank you're in, hopefully these tips help you all get off to a great start going into the new season. Alright, let's jump straight into tip number 1, which is to master the early game, because arguably the most important stage of any Resurgence match is the early game. Success here will more often than not translate to success later in the match. And here's how you master the early game. First, you and your squad need to find a POI that you all feel comfortable fighting at off the drop. And if you're solo queuing, I recommend you take the initiative to call out where you want to land while still in the plane. Second, plan out exactly where the 3 you are going to drop before you even leave the plane. This includes considering all the different possible flight paths, and for me and my squad, the place that we landed every game was top key. So we would either land middle balcony, back doors, or on the side stairs, depending on the flight path of the plane. Whatever got us to our spot quicker. Third is that immediately after landing, we would begin to look for anyone who might be dropping around us. Some of the freest kills you can get come at the early game if your drop is better than other players. So if you and your squad are coordinated with your drop, landing at a POI you feel comfortable at, and are ready to fight the second your feet hit the ground, it's usually going to lead to success. And one bonus tip here is that sometimes it's better not to always be the first person to land. Having someone on your team land shortly after an opponent can give you an edge in a fight, as that opponent has to turn around to shoot you. So if you and your squad are struggling off drop, this is something you all might want to try. From here, we move right into tip number 2, which is still part of the early game, but this one is to get your loadout as fast as you can. Now, once you have mastered your drop spot, you need to focus and prioritize getting your loadout. At Keep or other big POIs with lots of floors, this can sometimes be difficult, as there are usually multiple teams who land there and are fighting on the various levels. But you need to stay focused and ensure that you are prioritizing looting, getting money in order to get the loadout ASAP. Now, the reason why this is so important, and especially so at the higher ranks, is that if you get distracted and you or your teammates start dying, you'll get into the respawn blender. This means that you're not going to have your loadout right away. You're running around and maybe resetting at different POIs. And what's going to happen is you're going to run into other teams who already have their loadouts. And usually those fights don't go well when it's meta loadout versus floor loot trash. Next up is tip number 3, and this is something that all top level players can do well, which is to play together. And this comes into play not only at the beginning of the game, but for the whole rest of the match and every fight that you and your team participate in. Now, does this mean holding hands and stacking from start to finish? No, it does not. But what it does mean is that you're working together as a team to get angles, trades, team shoot players, and rotate. So let's get a bit more into those. What do I mean by taking angles? Instead of all standing on top of each other and shooting from the same direction, spread out a bit and try to apply pressure on opponents from different directions. Shooting at an enemy from 2 or more spots makes for a much easier kill. As for getting trades, if your teammate is fighting in close range, you should be close enough behind them that if they go down, you're right next to them and ready to take out the person that knocked them. Team shooting is an incredibly important game mechanic the higher up you get, especially due to the changes made to assists in Season 2 Reloaded. You have to damage an enemy before knocking them in order to get an assist. Team shooting leads to more kills, more assists, and just generally more SR. And finally, rotating together is incredibly important. Sending one person out at a time on rotation is going to lead to each individual, and more often than not, the last guy on the team to rotate getting focused down and eliminated. Next up is tip number 4, which is learn when and how to anchor. Now, the concept of anchoring is one that many of you may not have heard before, but it's an incredibly important skill to know for higher lobbies. And what anchoring means in a BR context is that one player on your team is holding down a specific location or looking a certain way while looking over your teammates, preventing a flank, and also offering a safe retreat option if things go south for your other 2 teammates. Now, when I'm playing with a couple of demons, this is the role that I usually find myself in, and here are a couple of examples. In this first example, our team is posted in the best spot for end zone, and there is a team down the hill around the buildings. But if all 3 of us push down off the building to look at that one team, it's incredibly easy for us to get pushed out of that spot and forced out of the game-winning position. Some other team will take that building and the height from us. So, to ensure we maintain our strong position, I hang back and keep an eye on our flank while also looking over at my teammates and being ready to help them if needed. Now, the person anchoring doesn't usually end the game with a ton of kills, but that's okay as long as it's ensuring a win or at least a high placement at the minimum for the squad. One thing to note is if you're going to play this way or play as the anchor, it's important to communicate this with your team so that they understand that they're playing as only a duo and you're not going to be nearby to help them immediately. And in this first example, it resulted in a win. But here's another example where I was trying to anchor and things went south and I played probably a little too cautious. As you can see here, my teammates got wiped and then I ended up dying after them. So in summary, anchoring is a difficult skill to master, but can bring a ton of value to your team if done correctly. Tip number 5 is one that might seem obvious, but it's an incredibly important skill to have in ranked Resurgence. And this is that you need to be able to win your 1v1s. You need to know when to take them, when not to take them, and be actively evaluating the consequences of losing a potential 1v1 at all times. And just to explain things in a little bit more detail, I'm going to cover a couple of instances of 1v1s. A good 1v1 that I win, a good 1v1 that I lose, and a bad 1v1. And hopefully those 3 examples help you all to understand some different situations that can arise in a ranked Resurgence match. So starting off, here's an example of a good 1v1 that I win. What makes this a good 1v1 in a fight that I win is that I can tell that it's just a duo down there as they're playing scared and cautious at the edge of zone. Also, my team is close by to get my trade if needed, and I put the player weak already. Here's another example of a good 1v1. This guy just res both of his teammates, so I know for a fact that he's alone. Also, zone is pulling away from us, and we're gonna have to fight some other teams coming through graveyard here soon. Getting him out of the game is a good thing to do. I just executed poorly. Now in this situation, I'm pushing into fighting teams without much cover or information at all, and only one teammate of mine is near me. So I don't have backup, and there are gonna likely be more enemies close by even if I can get a knock. So really, there's no point in me pushing this. And if this is an area that you struggle in, what I recommend is just a lot of practice. The best way to learn how to win 1v1s is by getting in as many engagements that you can. So hop into some pubs, whether it's solos or squatted up, and start ripping bounties, UAVs, and pushing teams as much as you can, while not shutting off your brain entirely. And I promise that with a lot of practice will come a lot of confidence. Now, before we get into tip number 6, for my last Warzone video, 98% of you who watch were not subscribed. So if you're either a new or returning viewer, hopefully I've earned your sub. And if I haven't yet, maybe these next couple of tips will get me there. But either way, thanks for watching, and I'm thrilled that so many people have found these videos helpful. But with that, let's jump into the next tip, which is a mechanic that all high-level players have mastered and abuse constantly. And this is to live ping everything. Pings not only give your team information, but they also give you 3 seconds of essentially wall hacks. With the prevalence of smokes in ranked, live pinging players before they throw a smoke and run into one can lead to you getting a free knock. But if you don't use it, it can result in the opposite. Here in this example, you can see just how important live pings are, as if one of us had pinged this player, it would have led to a win or a difference in 40 SR. I genuinely cannot emphasize enough how important live pinging is, and if you realize you're not doing it often in your gameplay, that is something you need to actively work on changing. Basically, anyone you shoot at, except for maybe close ranges, you should be live pinging, or if you get knocked by someone, live ping who knocked you at a minimum. Tip number 7 is to prioritize reviving your teammates. Now when zone 4 hits and there's no longer the ability to respawn, there will come times where you're the last one alive on your team. And in these situations, you should be doing what you can to get your team back, within reason. This means that if there's a buy close to you and you have the cash, you should be making a push to get your teammates back. In this example here, both of my random teammates die, and even though there are teams right on the buy station, I make a smoke play and get both of my teammates back, which ultimately lets us go from a terrible placement to finishing second. Having 2 people alive is always better than 1, unless your teammates are total burgers, so maybe take that with a grain of salt. Moving on to tip number 8, which is to stay alive and play your life. And this is something that, just like live pinging, all high-level players can do well. When you're the last one alive on your team and the respawn timer is up, you need to be able to play your life efficiently. At lower levels, you might be able to get away with ratting in a corner close to where your teammates just died. But at higher levels, teams who know what they're doing and know that there is only one player left on a squad are going to go out of their way to hunt you down. Ratting is a death sentence in most situations in high diamond plus lobbies. And the number 1 tip when it comes to playing your life is breaking line of sight of the enemy at the soonest opportunity and continuing to ensure that that line of sight is broken regularly. For more success here, you need to be able to plate while you move or know to pre-smoke any open areas you have to cross. A little tip for those of you who play on controller without paddles, I recommend learning to claw while running and plating. Next up is tip number 9, which is to learn to rotate early and become familiar with predicting where zones end. Now in games where your team has won the drop, gotten your loadout, and now are in the mid game looking for third parties or eliminations, It can be easy to forget, especially in Zone 3, that some nasty zone pulls are in your near future. Before getting too distracted or interested in a third party, realize that in Diamond Plus lobbies, teams are going to start rotating to smaller zones in advance. And if you go out of your way, away from the zone, that you're eventually going to have to get back into the zone at some point and likely fight your way there. Instead, you should look to rotate early and then be the team to hold people out of zone. This is a great way to ensure that you'll get some kills, but also a higher placement than if you were to go and do something different. Now, if you watch a lot of top 250 players play, they don't really do this too often. And why is that? Well, they can roll and smoke most teams that they come across with ease and do it quickly enough that getting back into zone isn't an issue. But for the rest of us that aren't playing with a top 250 squad or an iridescent stack, it's a much safer play to get to zone before other teams do and then hold them out. One tip for being able to rotate early to zones with ease, and this is an incredibly important concept for Diamond Plus lobbies, is to pre-smoke your rotations. What this means is that everyone on your team is throwing smokes to where you're going to be running to. Because if you start to smoke after you start getting shot at, someone on your team is going to go down. Also, it's important to stagger your smokes and burn as many as are needed to get to your building, rock, or wherever the team is trying to get to. All right, now before we end the video, I've got a bonus tip, which based on the comments in some of my past videos, a lot of you were having issues being stuck solo queuing and having a hard time finding teammates. So hopefully these next couple of tips help you guys out with that. First is the simplest way, but this is to just solo queue until you run into some good teammates who use their mics and can hold their own. And even if they don't use their mics, if they can still hold their own, still shoot them an invite after the game is over and see if they want to squad up. I've found a lot of decent players this way, and I've been able to climb with a lot of random people that I've run into in my ranked matches. My next tip is to go to the MW3 Discord server and look for a group in one of the channels. This is how I found some really good players to play with, and I'm extremely glad that I did that. That worked out really well for me. And the final way I would recommend is just leaving a comment down below to see if there's anyone who would want to squad up. I've seen some comments in my past videos of people looking to play together and linking up, and I think that's pretty awesome. Anyway, all of these are great ways to meet cool people, make some friends, and juice up your SR. All right, with that, I hope you all enjoyed this video and learned a lot from these high-level ranked Resurgence tips. And if you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos in the future. So with that, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.